His daughters came up to kiss him. Here there was no anger against him, but here, too, all the same there was also something peculiar, as it were. True, the general, owing to certain circumstances, had become overly suspicious, but as he was an experienced and adroit father and husband, he at once took his measures. Perhaps we will do no great harm to the vividness of our narrative if we stop here and resort to the aid of a few clarifications in order to establish directly and more precisely the relations and circumstances in which we find General Epanchin's family at the beginning of our story. We said just now that the general, though not a very educated but, on the contrary, as he himself put it, a self-taught man, was nevertheless an experienced husband and adroit father. Among other things, he had adopted a system of not rushing his daughters into marriage, that is, of not hovering over them and bothering them too much with his parental love's longing for their happiness, as involuntarily and naturally happens all the time, even in the most intelligent families, where grown-up daughters accumulate. He even succeeded in winning Lizaveta Prokofyevna over to his system, though that was normally a difficult thing to do, difficult because it was also unnatural, but the general's arguments were extremely weighty and based on tangible facts. Besides, left entirely to their own wishes and decisions, the brides would naturally be forced to see reason at last, and then things would take off, because they would do it eagerly, casting aside their caprices and excessive choosiness. All the parents would have to do would be to keep a watchful and, if possible, inconspicuous eye on them, lest some strange choice or unnatural deviation occur, and then, seizing the proper moment, step in with all their help and guide the affair with all their influence. Finally, the fact alone, for instance, that their fortune and social significance increased every year in geometrical progression meant that the more time that passed, the more advantageous it was to his daughters, even as brides. But among all these irrefutable facts another fact occurred. The eldest daughter, Alexandra, suddenly and almost quite unexpectedly, as always happens, turned 25. And at almost the same time Afanasy Ivanovich Totsky, a man of high society, with high connections and extraordinary wealth, again showed his old desire to marry. He was a man of about 55, of elegant character and with extraordinary refinement of taste. He wanted to marry well, he was an exceeding connoisseur of beauty. Since he had for some time maintained an extraordinary friendship with General Epanchin, especially strengthened by a joint participation in certain financial undertakings, he therefore asked the general, looking for friendly counsel and guidance, so to speak, whether it would or would not be possible to think of him marrying one of his daughters. In the quiet and beautiful flow of General Epanchin's family life, an obvious upheaval was coming. The undoubted beauty in the family, as has already been said, was the youngest, Aglaya. But even Totsky himself, a man of exceeding egoism, understood that he was not to seek there and that Aglaya was not destined for him. It may be that the somewhat blind love and all too ardent friendship of the sisters exaggerated the matter, but among them, in the most sincere way, they determined that Aglaya's fate was to be not simply a fate, but the most ideal possible earthly paradise. Aglaya's future husband would have to be endowed with all perfections and successes, to say nothing of wealth. The sisters even decided among themselves, and somehow without any special superfluous words, on the possibility, if need be, of making sacrifices on their own part in favor of Aglaya. The dowry allotted to Aglaya was colossal and quite out of the ordinary. The parents knew of this agreement between the two elder sisters, and therefore, when Totsky asked for advice, they had little doubt that one of the elder sisters would not refuse to crown their desires, the more so as Afanasy Ivanovitch would make no difficulties over the dowry. As for Totsky's offer, the general, with his particular knowledge of life, at once valued it extremely highly. Since Totsky himself, owing to certain special circumstances, had meanwhile to observe an extreme prudence in his steps and was still only probing into the matter, the parents, too, offered only the most remote suggestions for their daughter's consideration. In response to which they received from them a reassuring, if not very definite, statement that the eldest, Alexandra, would perhaps not decline. Though of firm character, she was a kind, reasonable girl and extremely easy to get along with. She might even marry Totsky willingly, and if she gave her word, she would honestly keep it. She cared nothing for splendor, and not only threatened no fusses or abrupt upheavals, but might even sweeten and soothe one's life. She was very good-looking, though not in a spectacular way. What could be better for Totski? And yet the matter still went ahead gropingly. It was mutually and amicably agreed between Totski and the general that for the time being they would avoid any formal and irrevocable steps. The parents had still not even begun to speak quite openly with their daughters. Some dissonance seemed to set in. Mrs. Epanchin, the mother of the family, was becoming displeased for some reason, and that was very grave. There was one circumstance here that hindered everything, one complex and troublesome occurrence, owing to which the whole matter might fall apart irrevocably. This complex and troublesome occurrence, as Totski himself put it, had begun very far back, about 18 years ago. Next to one of Afanasy Ivanovitch's rich estates, in one of the central provinces, an impoverished petty landowner was living an impoverished life. This was a man remarkable for his ceaseless and anecdotal misfortunes, a retired officer, from a good noble family, and in that respect even better than Totski, a certain Philip Alexandrovich Barashkov. Buried in debts and mortgages, he succeeded at last, after hard, almost peasant-like labors, in setting up his small estate more or less satisfactorily. The smallest success encouraged him extraordinarily. Encouraged and radiant with hopes, he went for a few days to his district town, to meet and, if possible, come to a final agreement with one of his chief creditors. On the third day after his arrival in town, his warden came from the village, on horseback, his cheek burned and his beard singed, and informed him that the family estate burned down the day before, at noon, and that his wife burned with it, but the little children were left unharmed. This surprise even Barashkov, accustomed as he was to the bruises of fortune, could not bear. He went mad and a month later died in delirium. The burned-down estate, with its peasants gone off begging, was sold for debts, and Barashkov's children, two little girls aged 6 and 7, were taken out of magnanimity to be kept and brought up by Afanasy Ivanovich Totski. They were brought up together with the children of Afanasy Ivanovitch's steward, a retired official with a large family and a German besides. Soon only one girl, Nastia, was left, the younger one having died of whooping cough. Totsky, who was living abroad, soon forgot all about them. One day, some 5 years later, Afanasy Ivanovitch, passing by, decided to have a look at his estate and suddenly noticed in his country house, in the family of his German, a lovely child, a girl of about 12, lively, sweet, clever, and promising to become a great beauty. In that regard Afanasy Ivanovitch was an unerring connoisseur. That time he spent only a few days on his estate, but he had time to arrange things. A considerable change took place in the girl's education. A respectable, elderly governess was called in, experienced in the higher upbringing of girls, an educated Swiss woman, who, along with French, taught various other subjects. She settled into the country house, and little Nastia's upbringing acquired exceptional scope. Exactly 4 years later, this upbringing came to an end, the governess left, and a certain lady came to fetch Nastia, also a landowner of some sort, and also Mr. Totsky's neighbor, but in another, distant province, and on the instructions and by the authority of Afanasy Ivanovitch, took Nastia away with her. On this small estate there also turned out to be a small but newly constructed wooden house. It was decorated with particular elegance, and the little village, as if on purpose, was called. Delight. The lady landowner brought Nastia straight to this quiet little house, and as she herself, a childless widow, lived less than a mile away, she settled in with Nastia. Around Nastia an old housekeeper and a young, experienced maid appeared. There were musical instruments in the house, an elegant library for girls, paintings, prints, pencils, brushes, paints, an astonishing greyhound, and 2 weeks later Afanasy Ivanovitch himself arrived. After that he somehow became especially fond of this little village lost in the steppes, came every summer, stayed for 2, even 3 months, and thus a rather long time, some 4 years, passed peacefully and happily, with taste and elegance. Once it happened, at the beginning of winter, about 4 months after one of Afanasy Ivanovitch's summer visits to Delight, which this time had lasted only 2 weeks, that a rumor spread, or, rather, the rumor somehow reached Nastasia Philippovna, that in Petersburg, Afanasy Ivanovitch was about to marry a beauty, a rich girl, from the nobility, in short, to make a respectable and brilliant match. Later it turned out that the rumor was not accurate in all details. The wedding was then only a project, and everything was still very uncertain, but all the same an extraordinary upheaval took place in Nastasia Philippovna's life after that. She suddenly showed an extraordinary resolve and revealed a most unexpected character. Without further thought, she left her little country house and suddenly went to Petersburg, straight to Totsky, all on her own. He was amazed, tried to begin speaking, but it suddenly turned out, almost from the first phrase, that he had to change completely the style, the vocal range, the former topics of pleasant and elegant conversation, which till then had been used so successfully, the logic, everything, everything. Before him sat a totally different woman, not at all like the one he had known till then and had left only that July in the village of Delight. This new woman, it turned out, first of all knew and understood an extraordinary amount, so much that it was a cause of profound wonder where she could have acquired such information, could have developed such precise notions in herself. Could it have been from her girl's library? What's more, she even understood an exceeding amount about legal matters and had a positive knowledge, if not of the world, then at least of how certain things went in the world. Second of all, this was a completely different character from before, that is, not something timid, uncertain in a boarding school way, sometimes charming in its original liveliness and naivety, sometimes melancholy and pensive, astonished, mistrustful, weepy, and restless. No, here before him an extraordinary and unexpected being laughed and stung him with a most poisonous sarcasm, telling him outright that she had never felt anything in her heart for him except the deepest contempt, contempt to the point of nausea, which had followed directly upon her initial astonishment. This new woman announced to him that in the fullest sense it would make no difference to her if he married any woman he liked right then and there, but that she had come to prevent this marriage of his, and to prevent it out of spite, solely because she wanted it that way, and consequently it must be that way, well, so that now I can simply laugh at you to my heart's content, because now I, too, finally feel like laughing.